Bullies grabbed the girl's glasses. She flipped him hard enough to break the floor. Kieran Blackwood moved through Lincoln High School like a shadow, her slight frame barely registering on the radar of hundreds of bustling students. At barely 5 feet tall, with unruly auburn hair and thick-rimmed glasses that constantly slipped down her nose, she had mastered the art of invisibility. Her clothes hung loose on her thin frame, and she kept her head down, clutching worn backpack straps like lifelines through the social minefield of high school. What none of her classmates knew was that every Tuesday and Thursday evening for 8 years, Kieran disappeared into Master Chen's martial arts studio downtown, where she had earned her black belt in Taekwondo. Her parents enrolled her after neighborhood kids pushed her off her bike, but Kieran never mentioned her training at school. The quiet girl who flinched when people raised their voices was the same person who could break boards with bare hands and execute jumping kicks that would make Olympic athletes jealous. Lincoln High School sprawled across 15 acres in suburban Colorado, its red brick buildings and manicured lawns giving it academic respectability. The school prided itself on its championship football team and high college acceptance rates, but like most institutions, it had dark corners where administration's watchful eye didn't reach. The outdoor lunch courtyard, with scattered picnic tables and blind spots created by large oak trees, had become hunting ground for those who preyed on the vulnerable. The stairwell near the gymnasium, always dimly lit and rarely monitored, served as another favorite spot for those who preferred cruelty without witnesses. Kieran had been attending Lincoln for 3 years, ever since her family moved to Colorado when her father got transferred. She hoped starting fresh might give her a chance to reinvent herself, but within the first week, she had somehow painted a target on her back. Maybe it was how she stumbled over words when called on in class, or how she ate lunch alone reading fantasy novels, or simply that she looked like someone who wouldn't fight back. Whatever the reason, she became a magnet for students who found entertainment in making others miserable. Trent Garrison ruled the school's social hierarchy with confidence that came from being 6 feet tall, naturally athletic, and blessed with an easy smile that made teachers assume he was a good kid, despite evidence to the contrary. His sandy blonde hair was always perfectly styled, and he wore his letter jacket like armor, patches and pins, announcing his status as starting quarterback and student council vice president. To most adults, Trent was the picture of an all-American teenager. To students like Kieran, he was something far more dangerous. Flanking Trent were his 2 closest allies. Derek Matthews, a stocky wrestler whose humor involved physical intimidation, and Blake Porter, whose sharp tongue could reduce someone to tears with surgical precision. The trio had perfected their routine over years, knowing exactly how far they could push without crossing lines that would bring serious consequences. They were smart bullies, which made them infinitely more dangerous than obvious thugs who eventually got expelled. The first incident happened during Kieran's sophomore year, when she accidentally bumped into Trent while rushing to chemistry class. Her books scattered across the floor, and when she scrambled to collect them, Trent stepped on her notebook, grinding his heel into carefully written notes. "Watch where you're going, Four Eyes," he said with that charming smile, while Blake snickered about how maybe she needed stronger glasses. Derek accidentally kicked her pencil case down the hall, scattering contents like breadcrumbs. The whole thing lasted 30 seconds, but established the pattern that would define the next 2 years of Kieran's life. At first, incidents were sporadic and relatively minor. A shoulder check in the hallway that sent her stumbling into lockers. Comments about her clothes or appearance just loud enough for nearby students to hear and laugh. Her lunch getting accidentally knocked off the table in the cafeteria, leaving her to clean up the mess while fighting back tears. Each incident was carefully calibrated to be deniable, explainable as an accident or harmless teasing if any adult questioned it. Kieran's initial response was exactly what they wanted. She absorbed humiliation silently, cleaned up their messes, and tried even harder to stay invisible. She told herself that fighting back would only make things worse, that drawing attention would escalate the situation beyond her control. More importantly, she had promised her parents when they enrolled her in martial arts that she would never use her training to hurt anyone unless her life was in genuine danger. Martial arts is about discipline and self-control, her father had said. It's not about winning fights, it's about avoiding them. Those words echoed in her mind every time Trent and his friends pushed her boundaries, even as part of her itch to show them exactly what she was capable of. Mrs. Peterson, her English teacher, noticed occasional bruises on Kieran's arms and asked if everything was all right at home. Mr. Williams, the gym teacher, saw how Kieran flinched whenever students got too close during team activities. But when pressed for details, Kieran always had ready explanations. She was clumsy, she bruised easily, she just preferred to keep to herself. The adults wanted to believe her because the alternative meant acknowledging something ugly happening under their watch, and intervention meant paperwork and difficult conversations with popular students' parents. Other students noticed too, but their reaction was different. Some felt genuine sympathy for Kieran, but were too afraid of becoming targets themselves to intervene. Others found cruel entertainment in watching someone else absorb negative attention they might otherwise receive. A few seemed to take comfort in knowing they weren't at the bottom of the social food chain. The bystander effect flourished in Lincoln High's hallways, where everyone learned that the safest response to witnessing cruelty was to look away and walk faster. As junior year progressed, incidents escalated. Trent and his friends grew bolder, perhaps sensing that Kieran would never report them or fight back. They began timing their encounters for maximum humiliation. During the busy lunch rush, Derek would accidentally bump into Kieran while she carried her tray, sending food flying and her milk carton exploding across the floor. The entire cafeteria would turn to look, some laughing, others cringing in second-hand embarrassment, while Kieran knelt to clean up the mess with paper towels that disintegrated in puddles of milk and ketchup. The gymnasium stairwell became their favorite hunting ground for verbal harassment. The acoustics carried their laughter and comments throughout the space, but the location was isolated enough that no teachers ever witnessed encounters. They discovered that Kieran's route to sixth period biology took her through this area, and they began timing their movements to intersect with hers. Blake would make comments about her appearance, her clothes, her family's obvious lack of money based on her discount store backpack and second-hand sneakers. Derek would suggest improvements to her look, loudly wondering if she had ever considered contact lenses or a different haircut, or maybe just transferring schools entirely. Trent would play the reasonable one, occasionally telling his friends to take it easy while doing nothing to actually stop them. Through it all, Kieran endured. She developed strategies for survival, alternative routes through the school, careful timing of movements, and mental armor that she wrapped around herself each morning before walking through Lincoln's front doors. She threw herself into studies, maintaining a 4.2 GPA that put her in running for valedictorian, as if academic excellence could somehow shield her from social cruelty. Her teachers praised her dedication and work ethic, never suspecting that school had become an endurance test rather than a place of learning. At home, Kieran continued her martial arts training with increased intensity. Master Chen noticed her improved focus during sparring sessions, the way she channeled emotion into precise technique. He had been training students for over 30 years and recognized signs of someone working through anger and frustration. But when he gently probed about her life outside the studio, Kieran deflected with the same skill she used to deflect punches during practice. She was fine, school was fine, everything was fine. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in November when autumn air carried the promise of winter and football season was winding down toward playoffs. Kieran had been looking forward to this particular day because Maya Reeves, a new student who had transferred in at the beginning of the semester, had asked to study together for their upcoming chemistry test. Maya was everything Kieran wasn't. Confident, outgoing, pretty in an effortless way that made other girls simultaneously admire and resent her. She had striking dark hair that caught light when she moved, and brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. More importantly, Maya had shown Kieran genuine kindness during their brief interactions, helping her pick up dropped books without being asked, and defending her when Blake made particularly cruel comments within earshot. They had agreed to meet in the library during lunch, but Kieran first needed to retrieve her chemistry notes from her locker. She was mentally reviewing molecular structures as she worked her combination, completely absorbed in thoughts of covalent bonds and electron sharing. She didn't notice Trent, Derek, and Blake approaching until it was too late to escape. Well, what do we have here? Trent's voice carried that particular tone that made Kieran's stomach clench with dread. I heard a rumor that our little bookworm has been making friends. Kieran clutched her chemistry notebook against her chest and tried to sidestep around them, but Derek moved to block her path. The hallway was mostly empty since lunch had already started, which meant fewer witnesses, but also less chance of teacher intervention. I heard you're tutoring the new girl, Blake added with a smirk. Maya something or other. Pretty girl. Way out of your league, don't you think? She's just helping me study, Kieran mumbled, her voice barely audible. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, hoping that submission would make them lose interest and move on. Maybe we should give Maya a heads up, Trent suggested, his tone casual, but his eyes calculating. Let her know what kind of person she's wasting her time with. Wouldn't want her to get the wrong idea about our school standards. The threat was clear, and Kieran felt something cold settle in her stomach. It was one thing for them to target her, but the thought of them turning their attention to Maya because of their association filled her with a different kind of fear. Please, Kieran whispered, the word slipping out before she could stop it. Just leave her alone. Oh, now she's begging, Blake said with delight. This is even better than I thought. She's got a little crush. The bell indicating the end of lunch period rang, and students began filtering back into the hallways. Kieran thought she was saved, that they would disperse to their respective classes and leave her alone. But as Maya appeared at the end of the hallway, walking toward them with her chemistry textbook in hand and a friendly smile on her face, Kieran realized the situation was about to get much worse. Maya! Blake called out cheerfully, waving her over. Perfect timing! We were just talking about you. Maya approached with the kind of confidence that came from never having been the target of systematic cruelty. She smiled at Trent and his friends with genuine warmth, not yet recognizing the predatory gleam in their eyes. Hi, she said, then turned to Kieran. Ready for our study session? I brought my notes on ionic compounds. Actually, Trent said, stepping slightly between Maya and Kieran, we were just discussing whether our little friend here had mentioned her reputation around school. That's not true, Maya said firmly, when Derek jumped in with comments about Kieran being the school's charity case. Kieran is really smart, and she's been nothing but kind to me since I got here. Smart, sure, Blake agreed with mock sincerity. But smart doesn't make up for everything else, you know. The way she dresses, the way she acts all weird and antisocial. Most people think she's kind of creepy, actually. The warning was subtle but unmistakable. Associate with Kieran and risk becoming a target yourself. It was the same calculation that dozens of other students had made over the years, and Kieran watched Maya's face as she processed the social mathematics of high school survival. Besides, Derek added, reaching out suddenly and plucking Maya's glasses right off her face, maybe Four Eyes here could learn something from your sense of style. These are much nicer frames. Maya blinked in sudden nearsightedness, reaching automatically for her glasses. Hey, give those back. But Derek was already tossing them to Blake, who caught them with a grin. Let's see how they look on our friend here, he said, moving toward Kieran. Stop it, Maya said, more firmly now. Give me my glasses back right now. Or what? Blake asked, holding the glasses just out of Kieran's reach as she stood frozen between them. You'll report us? For what, playing keep away? Kieran could see Maya squinting, trying to focus on what was happening around her. Without her glasses, Maya's confident posture had shifted to something more uncertain, more vulnerable. Come on, Four Eyes, Derek taunted, holding the glasses higher. Jump for them. Show your new friend how athletic you are. Please, Kieran said again, hating herself for begging but seeing no other option. Just give them back. Say please like you mean it, Blake demanded. Get on your knees and beg properly. The hallway was filling up with students now as the next class period approached. Some hurried past with their eyes averted, while others slowed down to watch the entertainment. This is ridiculous, Maya said, her voice stronger now despite her obvious disadvantage. She started moving toward Blake, reaching for her glasses. Give them back right now. Whoa there, Trent said, stepping in front of Maya and placing his hands on her shoulders to stop her progress. The touch was brief and could easily be explained as trying to prevent a collision, but Kieran saw Maya flinch slightly at the unexpected contact. That flinch was what did it. In that moment, Kieran saw her own future reflected in Maya's face. She saw the gradual erosion of confidence, the careful calculations about which hallways to avoid, the slow transformation from outgoing newcomer to cautious victim. She saw Maya learning to make herself smaller, quieter, more invisible, all to avoid the attention of boys who found entertainment in others' fear. Something crystallized in Kieran's mind with perfect clarity. She had spent 2 years telling herself that her martial arts training was for discipline and self-control, that violence was never the answer, that rising above their level was the moral choice. But watching Trent's hands on Maya's shoulders, seeing the calculating look in Blake's eyes as he held the glasses just out of reach, she realized that her inaction wasn't noble. It was complicity. By refusing to defend herself, she had enabled them to perfect their techniques on her before turning them on someone else. The hallway noise seemed to fade into background static as Kieran made her decision. Master Chen had taught her that martial arts was about protecting yourself and others from harm. He had also taught her that sometimes the most disciplined response was the one that stopped a threat before it could escalate. Give her the glasses back, Kieran said, her voice carrying a new quality that made Blake look at her with surprise. Excuse me, Blake laughed. Did the mouse just squeak? I said give her the glasses back, Kieran repeated, stepping forward. Her posture had changed subtly, her weight shifting onto the balls of her feet in a stance that looked casual but would allow for explosive movement in any direction. Or what? Derek asked, moving to flank her. You'll tell the principal on us? Kieran looked at Maya, who was still squinting in their direction, trying to follow the conversation by sound. She thought about all the students who had watched her humiliation over the years, who had learned through her example that bullies faced no consequences for their actions. Or I'll take them back, she said simply. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Kieran could see the exact instant when Trent, Derek, and Blake realized that something fundamental had shifted. The quiet girl who had absorbed their abuse for 2 years was looking at them with steady eyes that held no trace of fear. You'll take them back? Trent repeated, as if the concept was so foreign, he needed to hear it again to believe it. That's right, Kieran said, taking another step forward. Blake held the glasses higher, grinning. I'd like to see you try. Four Eyes. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but to the students watching in the hallway, it seemed to unfold in slow motion. Kieran moved forward with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years drilling the same movements until they became instinct. Her right hand shot up to grab Blake's wrist, not with desperate clutching of someone reaching for an object, but with the controlled grip of someone who understood leverage and joint manipulation. Blake's confident grin faltered as he felt the pressure on his wrist, a specific kind of discomfort that indicated his opponent knew exactly which nerves to target. Before he could react, Kieran's left hand captured the glasses while her right hand applied just enough pressure to make him release them reflexively. "What the hell?" Derek started forward, but stopped when Kieran turned to face him. She handed the glasses to Maya with careful gentleness, her movement so smooth it looked choreographed. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft with genuine concern. Maya slipped her glasses back on and blinked as the world came back into focus. When she looked at Kieran, her expression held surprise, gratitude, and something that might have been admiration. "I'm fine," Maya said. "Thank you." The simple exchange seemed to enrage Blake, who was rubbing his wrist and staring at Kieran with newfound hostility. "You think you're tough now? You think grabbing someone's wrist makes you some kind of badass?" "I think taking someone's glasses makes you a bully," Kieran replied calmly. "And I think it stops now." "It stops when we say it stops," Trent said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there before. "Actually," Kieran said, meeting his gaze directly for what felt like the first time in years, "it stops now." The hallway had grown quieter as more students stopped to watch. Some had their phones out, sensing that whatever was happening might be worth recording. "You know what your problem is?" Trent said, stepping closer to Kieran. "You don't understand your place here. You don't understand how things work." "I understand perfectly," Kieran replied. "You pick on people you think won't fight back, and when someone finally does, you can't handle it." Derek moved to Kieran's left while Blake circled to her right, and she recognized the formation immediately. It was the same triangular positioning that predators used to isolate and intimidate prey, designed to make the target feel surrounded and overwhelmed. 2 years ago, it would have worked. But the person standing in this hallway was not the same girl who had first cowered under their attention. "Last chance," Trent said, his voice carrying the kind of false reasonableness that bullies used before escalating to violence. "Apologize for putting your hands on Blake, and we'll forget this whole thing happened." Kieran glanced around at the students watching from what they thought was a safe distance. She saw the mixture of anticipation and fear on their faces, the way they held their phones ready to capture whatever happened next. "No," she said simply. Blake made the first move, lunging forward with the kind of wild swing that came from anger rather than training. To someone who had spent years practicing defensive techniques, his approach was telegraphed and clumsy. Kieran sidestepped smoothly, using his momentum against him, and applied a basic hip throw that sent him tumbling to the floor with a crash that echoed through the hallway. The sound of Blake hitting the linoleum seemed to galvanize Derek, who rushed at Kieran from her left side. But Master Chen had drilled her extensively on dealing with multiple attackers, and she was ready for him. A simple foot sweep caught Derek's ankle at exactly the right moment, sending him sprawling across the floor in a tangle of limbs. Trent stared at his two friends on the ground, then at Kieran, who stood calmly in the center of the hallway with her backpack still properly positioned on her shoulders. She wasn't breathing hard, wasn't even disheveled. "How?" Trent asked, the question slipping out before he could stop it. 8 years of Taekwondo," Kieran replied matter-of-factly. "I just never saw the point in mentioning it before." The confrontation came 2 days later, after school in the parking lot where students gathered to wait for rides or walk home. Trent felt he needed to reassert his dominance with a larger audience, blocking Kieran's path with several other students who normally stayed on the periphery of their activities. "If you want a fair fight," Kieran said when they accused her of using dirty tactics, "then let's have one. Just you and me, Trent. No friends, no cheap shots, no excuses." The crowd stirred with excitement. Someone shouted, "Fight!" and others took up the chant. Trent looked around at the faces surrounding them, recognizing that he was trapped by his own image. To back down now would be to admit that his power had always been an illusion. "Fine," he said, shrugging off his letter jacket, "but when I put you in the hospital, don't come crying about how unfair it was." The crowd formed a rough circle around them, Everyone pulling out phones to record what they sensed would be a legendary moment in Lincoln High history. Kieran could see Maya near the edge of the circle, her expression worried but supportive. Trent moved with the confidence of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. His first punch was a powerful right cross aimed at Kieran's face, the kind of haymaker that would have ended most fights before they really began. But Kieran wasn't most people. She had spent years training against opponents larger and stronger than herself, learning to use speed and technique to overcome physical disadvantages. She slipped Trent's punch with a subtle movement of her head, letting his fist whistle past her ear close enough to feel the wind of its passage. The miss threw Trent off balance, and Kieran took advantage of his momentary vulnerability to land a precise kick to his solar plexus. It wasn't a devastating blow, but it was enough to double him over and force him to step back, gasping for air. Kieran moved like water, flowing around his attacks with an economy of motion that made her look almost lazy compared to his increasingly frantic efforts. Every few seconds, she would dart in with a quick strike of her own, a palm strike to his ribs, a kick to his thigh, a precise punch to his shoulder that temporarily numbed his arm. While Trent grew more winded and desperate with each exchange, Kieran remained calm and controlled, barely breathing hard despite the intense physical activity. "Stand still and fight!" Trent shouted in frustration, launching himself at her in a tackle that might have worked against an untrained opponent. Kieran sidestepped smoothly and used his momentum to help him crash into the chain-link fence that bordered the parking lot. The metallic clang of his impact silenced the crowd momentarily, and when Trent turned around, there was blood trickling from a cut on his forehead where he had hit the fence. "I am fighting," Kieran replied calmly. "This is what real fighting looks like." What followed was a demonstration rather than a fight. Kieran moved with the fluid precision of someone who had spent thousands of hours perfecting her craft, while Trent flailed with the desperate energy of someone watching his reputation crumble in real time. She controlled the distance between them effortlessly, staying just out of range of his attacks while landing her own strikes with surgical precision. The end came when Trent, driven by desperation and wounded pride, picked up a rock from the parking lot and hurled it at Kieran's head. It was a dangerous escalation that crossed the line from schoolyard fight into potential assault with a deadly weapon. Kieran ducked under the projectile and closed the distance between them in 2 quick steps. Her response was swift and decisive, a jumping kick that caught Trent squarely in the chest and sent him flying backward to land hard on the asphalt. This time, he didn't get up immediately. The parking lot was completely silent now, except for the sound of Trent's labored breathing. He lay on his back, staring up at the sky, while Kieran stood over him with her fists still raised in a defensive position. "Stay down," she said quietly, but her voice carried clearly in the stillness. For a moment, it looked like the fight was over. Trent appeared to be finished, his chest heaving as he struggled to catch his breath. The crowd waited to see if Kieran would press her advantage, if she would deliver the kind of brutal finishing move that would cement her victory and his humiliation. But as Trent struggled to sit up, as she saw the genuine fear in his eyes for the first time, Kieran made a different choice. Instead of striking again, she stepped back and lowered her hands. "It's over," she said, addressing not just Trent, but the entire crowd that had gathered to watch. "We're done here." 2 weeks after the parking lot incident, Kieran was surprised to find Trent waiting by her locker after school. He stood at a respectful distance, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, and his usual confidence replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like humility. "I wanted to apologize," Trent said, the words coming out in a rush. "For everything. For the past 2 years, for what we did to you, for being a bully. I don't really have an excuse for it. I just thought it was funny, I guess. I thought it made me look cool or tough or whatever." He shook his head. "I never really thought about how it affected you." "What changed?" Kieran asked. Trent was quiet for a long moment, staring at the floor. Watching that video, seeing myself get beat up by someone half my size, seeing how pathetic I looked, but also seeing how you could have kept going and chose not to. You could have really hurt me when I was down, but you didn't. Violence should never be the first choice, Kieran said, but sometimes it's the only language bullies understand. I understand now, Trent said, and I'm sorry, really sorry. I know it doesn't undo anything, but I wanted you to know. Kieran studied his face for a moment longer, then nodded. Apology accepted. But it's not just about me, Trent. It's about everyone you and your friends have targeted over the years. And it's about making sure it doesn't happen again. It won't, Trent said quickly. As far as I'm concerned, that whole thing is over. Done. As Trent walked away, Kieran reflected on how strange it felt to have closure after so long. The boy who had made her life miserable for 2 years had just apologized with what seemed like genuine remorse. Maya appeared at her elbow, having waited at a discreet distance during the conversation. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Different than I thought it would," Kieran admitted. "I spent so long being angry at him, and now I mostly just feel sorry for him." "Think about it," Kieran said as they walked toward the exit together. "He spent 2 years thinking his value came from making other people feel small. What kind of person must you be to find entertainment in someone else's pain?" As they stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, Kieran felt a sense of peace that had been missing from her life for longer than she cared to remember. The school that had once felt like a prison now felt like just a building where she happened to spend her days learning things that would help her build the future she wanted. Looking back at Lincoln High as they walked away, Kieran thought about all the students still inside those walls who were fighting their own battles against bullies and indifference. She hoped that her story would reach some of them, would show them that powerlessness was often a choice and that sometimes the most important fight was the one you finally decided to have. She had learned that standing up for yourself didn't make you a bully in return, as long as you remembered to extend your hand to help others up, rather than using your strength to keep them down. The difference between a victim and a survivor, she realized, was sometimes just the willingness to say no and mean it, regardless of the consequences. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, standing up for yourself showed others that they could stand up too, creating ripples of courage that spread far beyond your own small corner of the world.